The massive space station Kepler Prime floated in the void between three star systems, like a metal mountain covered in lights and docking bays. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went every hour, bringing diplomats and traders and soldiers to this neutral meeting place where no single species could claim control. Today the station buzzed with more activity than usual because the Galactic Threat Assessment Council was meeting to decide the fate of a new species that had recently discovered faster-than-light travel. Ambassador Velthar stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors based on his mood. Right now his skin showed the deep purple of serious concentration as he reviewed the thick data file one more time. The blue lights in his compound eyes dimmed as he absorbed the information about these creatures called humans from the planet Earth. Around the circular chamber, other alien representatives waited in their designated areas, speaking in hushed tones through translators that turned their various clicks and whistles and electromagnetic pulses into understandable speech. They say, humans had been discovered only 6 months ago when their primitive exploration ship stumbled into Zephyrian space near the Outer Rim territories. Since then, survey teams had visited their homeworld and compiled detailed reports about their technology levels, military capabilities, social structures, and potential for expansion into galactic civilization. Velthar had personally overseen much of this assessment process and felt confident in the conclusions his teams had reached. Commander Dong Min sat in the small human observation area, trying not to show his nervousness as he waited for the Council's decision. He wore the dark blue uniform of the Earth Defense Fleet with its simple rank insignia, and felt underdressed compared to the elaborate ceremonial outfits worn by other species representatives. His aide, Lieutenant Sora, stood beside him taking notes on a simple electronic tablet that looked primitive next to the holographic displays and neural interface devices used by the other delegates. She had noticed how the aliens looked at them with barely concealed amusement, as if humans were children playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. The chamber fell silent as Council Chairman Zorthak called the session to order with a sound like grinding metal that the translators rendered as formal speech. The chairman's species looked like walking crystals that reflected light in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow comfortably. His translated voice carried the weight of authority earned over centuries of maintaining peace between dozens of warring civilizations. Velthar approached the central podium with his data file and began his presentation. The holographic display above the chamber showed images of Earth with its blue oceans and white clouds spinning slowly in space. Then came pictures of human cities with their metal and glass towers reaching toward the sky. Next appeared diagrams of human spacecraft, with their chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives. The display showed human weapons from simple projectile guns to their most advanced nuclear warheads. Finally came charts and graphs analyzing human population growth patterns, resource consumption rates, territorial expansion models, and social development indices. The ambassador's 4 arms moved in graceful gestures as he explained his findings to the assembled council. Humans appeared to be a fairly typical carbon-based species that had evolved from predatory pack hunters on a medium-sized world, with moderate gravity and a single moon. Their technology followed predictable development patterns seen in thousands of other species. They had discovered agriculture approximately 10,000 years ago, developed writing 5,000 years ago, achieved industrial civilization within the last few centuries, and reached space travel within the past century. Their progression matched the standard model almost perfectly. Their military capabilities seemed adequate for a species of their development level, but nothing remarkable. They possessed chemical and nuclear weapons but had not yet developed energy shields, plasma weaponry, or gravitational manipulation technology. Their space fleet consisted of fewer than 100 vessels, most of which were designed for exploration and cargo transport rather than warfare. Their largest warship carried weapons equivalent to a standard patrol craft used by most established civilizations. Socially, humans showed typical pack bonding behaviors with strong family units and tribal loyalties that extended to larger national groups. They engaged in frequent conflicts with each other over resources and territory, but these wars remained limited to their single planet. Their governments ranged from democratic councils to authoritarian hierarchies, but all fell within normal parameters for a developing species. They showed no signs of the extreme militarism or expansionist ideology that would mark them as a major threat to galactic peace. Economically, humans demonstrated reasonable efficiency and resource utilization and showed potential for integration into the galactic trade networks. Their planet possessed adequate mineral reserves and their population had not yet exceeded their world's carrying capacity. They would likely require assistance in developing their industrial base to meet galactic standards, but this was normal for newly discovered species. Velthar concluded his presentation by recommending that humans be classified as a moderate threat, Level 3, which would allow them limited territorial expansion rights and restricted access to advanced technologies. This classification was standard for species that showed promise but needed time to develop proper galactic citizenship behaviors. It would prevent them from accessing military technologies beyond their current development level, while still permitting trade relationships and cultural exchange programs. The council members discussed the recommendation through their translators, creating a symphony of alien sounds that filled the chamber. Some representatives asked questions about specific aspects of human behavior or technology, but none raised serious objections to the proposed classification. The crystalline chairman called for a formal vote, and the result was unanimous approval. Commander, Dongmin felt his heart sink as he heard the decision announced. Level 3 classification meant humanity would be treated like children who needed supervision and protection from the dangerous galaxy around them. They would be allowed to establish colonies in a small designated zone, but could not expand beyond those boundaries without council approval. More importantly, they would be excluded from the advanced communication networks that connected established civilizations and would have to rely on slower conventional methods for interstellar coordination. Lieutenant Sora watched the alien representatives as they began filing out of the chamber and noticed something that troubled her. They weren't just dismissive of humanity. They seemed almost bored by the entire proceeding, as if classifying new species was just another routine administrative task. None of them had asked probing questions about human psychology or tried to understand what made humans different from other species they had encountered. They had simply compared human statistics to their standard charts and made their decision based on mathematical formulas. Back on Earth, scientist Nari worked late into the night in her laboratory at Seoul National University, completely unaware that aliens had been observing human civilization and making decisions about humanity's future. She stared at the equations covering her holographic display, trying to solve a problem that had puzzled physicists for decades. The mathematics describing quantum field fluctuations suggested that space-time itself might be malleable under the right conditions, but no one had ever figured out how to create those conditions artificially. 3 star systems away, engineer Taeho aboard the exploration vessel. New Seoul noticed something odd in the sensor readings as his ship traveled through deep space. There seemed to be some kind of scanning beam following them, but it was using techniques he didn't recognize. When he reported this to Captain Park Seo, the older man just shrugged and said it was probably interference from a nearby pulsar. Taeho wasn't convinced, but he had no way to prove his suspicions. The aliens believed they understood humanity perfectly because humans fit neatly into their established categories and models. They had encountered thousands of species over millions of years and had developed sophisticated systems for predicting how new civilizations would develop. Every species followed certain patterns based on their evolutionary history, technological development path, and social structures. Humans appeared to be textbook examples of a standard moderate development species. What the aliens failed to recognize was that their classification system was based on observing species that had developed in isolation before being contacted by galactic civilization. These species had time to reach stable equilibrium states where their behavior became predictable. Humans were different because they had been contacted while still in a rapid development phase, while their culture and technology were still evolving quickly. More importantly, humans possessed certain psychological traits that the alien observers had never encountered before in their long experience with galactic civilizations. The Council's decision would soon prove to be the most catastrophic misclassification in the history of the Galactic Threat Assessment System. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council classified humanity as a moderate threat, and the first signs that their assessment might be flawed began appearing in the most unexpected places. Captain Min Ho guided his cargo vessel Deep Runner through the asteroid fields of the Tau Ceti system, carrying medical supplies to the human colony on Kepler-7 when disaster struck without warning. The fusion reactor that powered his ship began making sounds no fusion reactor should ever make, followed by alarms that indicated imminent core breach. Min Ho had been flying cargo ships for 15 years and had seen every kind of mechanical failure possible, but this was different. According to his instruments, the reactor containment field was destabilizing in a way that defied the laws of physics as humans understood them. The magnetic bottles that held the superheated plasma were failing in a cascade pattern that should have been impossible, given the redundant safety systems built into the reactor design. Within minutes, his ship would either explode in a fusion fireball or lose all power and drift helplessly in space until his life support systems failed. Any other species in the galaxy would have followed standard emergency procedures by sending out a distress signal and abandoning ship in escape pods while hoping rescue arrived before their air ran out. Min Ho instead did something that no alien engineer would have considered. He shut down the reactor completely, sealed himself in an environmental suit, and crawled into the engineering compartment with a toolkit and a crazy idea that would either save his ship or kill him instantly. Working in zero gravity with only the light from his helmet to see by, Min Ho began dismantling his ship's fusion reactor, using spare parts from the cargo hold and components cannibalized from the life support system. What he built should not have worked according to any known principles of engineering. He created a hybrid drive system that combined fusion technology with chemical rockets and ion drives in a configuration that violated basic safety protocols. The power output was unstable, the fuel efficiency was terrible, and the whole thing generated radiation levels that would slowly kill anyone exposed to them for more than a few hours. But it worked. When the Zephyrian patrol ship Velkathar detected Min Ho's distress beacon and arrived to investigate, they found something that made no sense to their sophisticated sensors. The human cargo vessel was moving under power, using an engine configuration that their computers insisted was impossible. The fusion reaction was occurring at temperatures too low to sustain itself while somehow producing enough energy to maintain life support and propulsion. The radiation signature was completely unlike anything in their extensive database of known technologies. Commander Zethkor ordered his science officer to run full spectrum analysis of the human ship 3 times before accepting that the readings were correct. The humans had somehow created a functioning spacecraft engine from spare parts using principles that contradicted established physics. When he filed his report with Galactic Command, the response came back within hours, dismissing his findings as sensor malfunction and ordering him to escort the human vessel to the nearest repair facility for proper maintenance. On the frontier world of Kepler-7, something even more remarkable was happening, though none of the aliens monitoring the colony understood its significance. The planet had been selected as a test case for human adaptability because every previous species that attempted to colonize it had failed within 6 months. The world's ecology was aggressively hostile with predatory plants that could dissolve, metal atmospheric conditions that corroded most building materials, and native animals that seemed designed specifically to kill any foreign life forms. Haijin had been chosen to lead the colony because her background in xenobiology made her the most qualified person to deal with alien life forms. When she arrived on Kepler-7 with 200 volunteers, she expected to spend months fighting for survival, while slowly building the infrastructure needed to make the colony self-sufficient. Instead, she discovered something that changed everything about how humans approached colonization. The hostile ecosystem that had defeated every other species was not actually trying to kill them. It was trying to incorporate them into itself. The predatory plants released enzymes that broke down foreign materials so they could absorb the nutrients. The corrosive atmosphere was actually a complex chemical system designed to facilitate rapid biological adaptation. The dangerous animals were not attacking the colonists but testing them to determine whether they could become part of the local food web. Instead of fighting the ecosystem, Haijin decided to join it. She had her colonists collect samples of every local organism and began systematic experiments in biological integration. Within weeks, they discovered that human gut bacteria could process several local plant species that had been classified as toxic. Local predators that had been attacking the settlement stopped when the colonists began leaving food offerings that contained human pheromones. Most remarkably, the colonists found they could domesticate creatures that previous species had considered impossibly aggressive. Dr. Kim, working as the colony's lead researcher, made breakthrough discoveries almost daily by approaching problems from angles that had never been tried before. She found that the corrosive atmospheric compounds could be neutralized by human sweat when mixed with certain local minerals. The metal-eating plants could be trained to consume only specific materials by exposing them to different electromagnetic frequencies. Native animals that had killed previous colonists became docile and even helpful when treated with the kind of patience and consistency humans use to train pets. The Zephyrian observers monitoring the colony from orbit filed increasingly confused reports as they watched the humans not just survive but actually thrive in an environment that had been written off as uninhabitable. Their long-range sensors showed the colony growing larger and more complex every week, with no signs of the social breakdown and resource depletion that had characterized previous attempts at settlement. Young-Soo had started his career as a simple cargo pilot but discovered he had a talent for trade negotiations that surprised everyone, including himself. While other species followed rigid diplomatic protocols that had been developed over thousands of years of interstellar commerce, Young-Soo treated every transaction as a conversation between individuals rather than representatives of entire civilizations. His first breakthrough came when he was delivering agricultural equipment to a Crixian mining station and discovered that the alien workers were struggling with equipment failures that were disrupting their entire operation. Instead of simply completing his delivery and leaving, Young-Soo spent 3 days learning about Crixian psychology and cultural values. He found that the aliens were having trouble with their machinery because they approached maintenance and repair from a completely different philosophical perspective than the human engineers who had designed the equipment. By serving as a cultural translator, Young-Soo helped the Crixian engineers understand how to work with human-built machines, while also learning how Crixian technology could be modified to better serve human needs. His success rate in trade negotiations began approaching 100%, because he was the first human to realize that every alien species had unique psychological quirks that could be understood and accommodated, rather than simply worked around. The Galactic Trade Commission noticed that human commercial relationships were developing much faster than their models predicted, but attributed this to beginner's luck rather than any systematic advantage. Their analysts assumed that human trading success would level off once other species learned to anticipate human negotiating tactics. Back on Earth, Nari made the breakthrough that would eventually change everything, though its significance would not become apparent for several more months. Working alone in her laboratory, she finally solved the equations that had been puzzling her for years. The quantum field fluctuations she had been studying were not random noise but actually represented tiny distortions in spacetime itself. More importantly, she discovered that these distortions could be amplified and controlled using relatively simple electromagnetic fields. Her first successful experiment produced a gravity anomaly that lasted for only 3 microseconds and affected an area smaller than a single atom. To most observers, this would have seemed like an interesting but ultimately useless discovery. Nari realized she had found a way to manipulate the fundamental structure of reality itself and began working feverishly to scale up her techniques. The alien monitoring stations scattered throughout the solar system detected unusual energy readings from her laboratory, but classified them as typical experimental physics research that posed no threat to galactic security. Their sensors were calibrated to identify known technologies, and Nari's work was so far outside established scientific paradigms that it barely registered as significant. Taiho continued to notice anomalies in the sensor readings aboard the New Soul, but his concerns were dismissed by senior officers who were more focused on completing their mapping mission of the Outer Rim territories. The strange scanning beams he detected seemed to be following human ships throughout their assigned patrol zone, but the patterns were so subtle that only someone specifically looking for them. Whoa. The first major test of humanity's true capabilities came when war leader Krixthul decided that the human mining colony on asteroid station Beta Hydri would make an easy target for his raiding forces. According to the intelligence reports provided by the Galactic Threat Assessment Council, The humans were classified as moderate threats with limited military capabilities and predictable defensive strategies. Krixthul commanded 2,000 of the finest Crixian shock troops equipped with energy weapons, personal shields, and powered armor that had proven effective against dozens of other species over the past century. The Crixian hegemony had built their reputation on quick, decisive strikes against weak targets that could be conquered with minimal casualties and maximum profit. Their standard tactics involved overwhelming numerical superiority combined with superior technology to break enemy morale within the first few hours of combat. Most species surrendered rather than face the complete destruction of their settlements and the enslavement of their populations. Colonel Sungwoo commanded the defense of Beta Hydrae with exactly 200 human marines, plus whatever civilian volunteers could be armed and trained in basic combat techniques. His forces had standard projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and personal body armor that provided minimal protection against energy weapons. According to every tactical analysis program in the galaxy, the humans should have been completely overwhelmed within minutes of the first attack. The battle began exactly as Krixthul expected, when his assault ships approached the asteroid station and opened fire with plasma cannons designed to disable the facility's shields and life support systems. The humans responded with defensive fire from projectile weapons that should have been completely ineffective against Crixian armor and shielding technology. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded according to standard raid protocols. Then something unprecedented happened that would be studied by military academies throughout the galaxy for centuries afterward. Instead of trying to hold defensive positions until their shields failed, the human marines began moving in small groups through the station's maintenance tunnels, using the facility's own structure as both cover and weapon. Sungwoo had realized that fighting a traditional defensive battle would result in certain defeat, so he ordered his troops to do something no other species had ever attempted. They turned the entire mining station into a weapon. Jin A served as the colony's medical officer, but found herself coordinating civilian evacuation while simultaneously treating wounded Marines and designing improvised weapons from mining equipment. She had no military training beyond basic emergency response protocols, but somehow managed to organize the station's 300 civilians into an effective support network that kept the Marines supplied with ammunition, medical care, and intelligence about enemy movements. What the Crixians had failed to understand was that humans possessed psychological traits that were completely unknown among the galactic community. When faced with impossible odds, instead of surrendering or fleeing in panic, the humans became more determined to fight. When their comrades were wounded or killed, instead of breaking formation and retreating, they became angrier and more focused on destroying their enemies. Most remarkably, they began coordinating their actions without formal command structures, in ways that confounded every tactical analysis system the Crixians possessed. The Marines split into dozens of small teams that moved independently through the station's corridors, but somehow maintained perfect coordination with each other and with the civilian support groups. They communicated using hand signals, facial expressions, and subtle body language that conveyed complex tactical information without revealing their positions to enemy sensors. When one team encountered superior numbers, they would retreat while other teams moved to attack the same enemies from different directions. Sungwoo found himself fighting alongside miners and technicians who had picked up weapons for the first time in their lives but somehow understood exactly what needed to be done without being given specific orders. The humans were displaying pack-hunting behaviors that had evolved millions of years ago on the plains of Africa, but were being expressed in high-tech combat situations that their ancestors could never have imagined. The Crixian assault teams had trained for years to fight against opponents who would follow predictable military doctrines based on established principles of warfare. They expected enemies to maintain organized defensive lines, fall back to prepared positions when overwhelmed, and surrender when their situation became hopeless. The humans did none of these things, instead seeming to thrive on chaos and impossible situations. Private Hansol had been working as a mining equipment operator before the attack began, but found himself leading a team of civilians in jury-rigging industrial lasers into weapons that could penetrate Crixian armor. He had never received military training, but somehow knew instinctively how to set ambushes, coordinate with other teams, and exploit weaknesses in enemy tactics that more experienced soldiers would have missed. The battle lasted for 18 hours and ended not with human surrender, but with the complete defeat of the Crixian raiding force. More than half of the alien assault troops were killed or wounded while the humans suffered fewer than 30 casualties. Most remarkably, the human forces captured the Crixian commander, along with his entire command staff, and seized 12 intact assault ships that would provide Earth's military with examples of advanced alien technology. Chang Ho worked as an information analyst for the Earth Defense Intelligence Service and had been tracking reports of unusual human activities throughout the expanding zone of human space. While other analysts dismissed these reports as statistical anomalies, Chang Ho began to see patterns that suggested something far more significant was happening. Every human anomaly shared certain characteristics that indicated underlying psychological and behavioral traits that the aliens had completely failed to recognize. The successful defense of Beta Hydrae was just the latest in a series of incidents where humans had achieved impossible results through methods that defied conventional military wisdom. Chang Ho compiled detailed analyses of 37 separate incidents over the past 6 months where human forces had defeated superior numbers of better-equipped enemies through tactics that no other species would have attempted. His report identified 3 key factors that made humans uniquely effective in combat situations. First was their refusal to accept defeat, even when facing overwhelming odds, which led them to continue fighting long after other species would have surrendered. Second was their ability to adapt their tactics in real time, based on changing battlefield conditions, rather than following predetermined battle plans. Third was their capacity for spontaneous coordination that allowed small units to work together effectively without centralized command and control systems. The report also noted that humans seemed to become more effective as combat situations became more desperate and chaotic. While other species performed best under controlled conditions with clear objectives and adequate resources, humans actually improved their performance when faced with uncertainty, resource shortages, and impossible missions. Chang Ho's superiors were impressed by his analysis, but assumed that human military advantages would be neutralized once alien opponents learned to anticipate human tactics. They failed to understand that adaptability itself was the core human advantage rather than any specific set of techniques that could be countered through preparation. Meanwhile, on the Crixian homeworld, the defeat at Beta Hydrae sent shockwaves through the military hierarchy that had considered their forces invincible against any moderate threat species. War leader Crixthul's detailed battle reports described human combat behaviors that seemed to violate basic assumptions about how intelligent species should respond to warfare. The humans had not just defeated superior numbers through better tactics, but had displayed psychological traits that the Crixians found deeply disturbing. The most troubling aspect of the battle reports was the description of human pack bonding, behaviors that seemed to make individual soldiers willing to sacrifice their lives for teammates they had known for only days or weeks. Crixian society was based on strict hierarchical relationships where loyalty was earned through years of mutual benefit and formal obligations. The idea that strangers would risk death to protect each other simply because they belonged to the same species was incomprehensible to the Crixian leadership. Even more disturbing was the humans' apparent ability to coordinate complex military operations without formal command structures. Crixian military doctrine emphasized centralized control with detailed planning and clear chains of command. The odd ice, humans had somehow managed to conduct effective combat operations using methods that should have resulted in chaos and confusion rather than victory. The Galactic Threat Assessment Council received preliminary reports of the Beta Hydrae incident, but initially dismissed them as exaggerated accounts from traumatized survivors. The idea that 200 poorly equipped humans could defeat 2,000. The situation escalated dramatically when the Void Syndicate decided that human shipping routes represented easy targets for their most profitable operations. The Syndicate brought together the galaxy's most dangerous pirate clans under a loose alliance that had terrorized trade routes for over 3 centuries. Their standard tactics involved using superior numbers and advanced technology to overwhelm merchant vessels before military patrols could respond to distress signals. Fleet Commander Zardoth personally oversaw the operation that was designed to capture or destroy every human cargo ship traveling through the Vega sector within a single coordinated strike. Intelligence reports indicated that humans followed predictable shipping schedules using poorly defended vessels that relied on galactic patrol forces for protection. The Syndicate deployed 47 attack ships equipped with the latest weapons, technology acquired through raids on military convoys throughout the Outer Rim territories. Captain Wu Jin commanded the merchant vessel Seoul Express when the first wave of pirate attacks began, but he was not the helpless victim that Zardoth expected to encounter. Wu Jin had served 15 years in Earth's military forces before becoming a civilian trader, and had spent the past 6 months secretly organizing human merchants into an informal defense network that operated completely outside official military channels. What the pirates discovered was something that had never existed before in the galaxy's long history of interstellar commerce. Instead of individual ships trying to outrun superior forces or sending distress signals while waiting for rescue, the human merchants began coordinating their movements in real time, using communication techniques that alien sensors could not detect or intercept. Mi Young served as communications specialist aboard the merchant vessel Busan Trader and had developed quantum-encrypted networks that allowed instant coordination across vast distances using principles that alien technology had not yet discovered. Her system enabled human ships scattered across dozens of star systems to share tactical information and coordinate defensive actions as if they were operating under unified command despite having no formal military organization. The first indication that something was wrong came when Syndicate attack groups found themselves facing coordinated resistance from merchant ships that should have been operating independently. Human cargo vessels that had been modified with hidden weapons began appearing at precise locations to provide covering fire for ships under attack. Trading convoys that should have scattered in panic instead formed defensive formations that maximized their limited firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. Even more disturbing from the pirates' perspective was the fact that human merchants began actively hunting Syndicate forces instead of simply defending themselves. Cargo ships that had successfully escaped attack would circle back to rescue other vessels or launch surprise attacks on pirate ships that thought they were pursuing helpless prey. The humans were displaying aggressive pack-hunting behaviors that turned what should have been a series of easy raids into running battles that lasted for days. Captain Hyun-Soo commanded the research vessel Busan and was conducting a routine survey mission in the Outer Rim when he detected unusual energy signatures that led to humanity's most significant discovery since achieving faster-than-light travel. Following the signals to their source brought him into contact with something that called itself the Remnant and claimed to have been observing galactic civilization for millions of years. The Remnant existed as a collective consciousness distributed across dozens of ancient space stations hidden in the void between star systems. It had originally been created by a species that had achieved technological transcendence before the current galactic powers had evolved beyond primitive tribal societies. The Remnant continued to exist primarily to observe and record the rise and fall of younger civilizations while remaining hidden from their notice. Hyun-Soo's first contact with the Remnant began when his ship's experimental sensors detected gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive artificial structures in what appeared to be empty space. Instead of reporting his discovery to Earth Command and waiting for official first contact procedures, Hyun-Soo made the decision to investigate personally, using the same kind of individual initiative that was becoming characteristic of human behavior throughout the galaxy. The Remnant had been monitoring human activities since first contact with the Zephyrian Empire and had reached conclusions about human psychology that contradicted every assessment made by the galactic powers. According to the ancient AI collective, humans represented the first species it had encountered that exhibited exponential adaptation capabilities under stress conditions. Most species reached stable behavioral patterns that became increasingly rigid over time, but humans seemed to become more flexible and innovative when faced with challenging circumstances. More significantly, the Remnant had identified behavioral patterns in human society that had never been recorded in any other species throughout millions of years of galactic observation. Humans displayed spontaneous cooperation between genetic strangers at levels that exceeded even the most highly evolved hive mind species. They showed willingness to sacrifice immediate personal benefits for long-term group advantages that surpassed the most sophisticated collective intelligence systems. Most remarkably, they demonstrated ability to coordinate complex activities across large populations without centralized control mechanisms. The Remnant shared this information with Hyun-Soo because it had concluded that humanity represented a fundamental discontinuity in galactic evolution that could either lead to unprecedented advancement for all species or complete collapse of the existing interstellar civilization. The ancient AI collective had decided to break its policy of non-interference because the situation had reached a critical threshold where action was necessary to prevent catastrophic outcomes. Back on Earth, scientist Yunji led humanity's first xenobiology research team and was making breakthrough discoveries by approaching alien technology from completely unconventional perspectives that ignored established scientific paradigms. While other species tried to understand alien devices by reverse engineering their components and analyzing their operating principles, Yunji's team began by studying the psychological assumptions that had influenced their original design. Her breakthrough came when she realized that most alien technology was designed by species that thought in fundamentally different ways than humans. Zephyrian devices were built by creatures that perceived time as a spatial dimension and therefore designed systems that optimized for temporal efficiency rather than energy conservation. Crixian equipment reflected their hierarchical social structure with rigid command and control systems that could not adapt to unexpected situations. By understanding the alien psychology behind the technology, Yunji's team could modify captured devices to work with human thought patterns and social behaviors. This led to innovations that dramatically improved human space travel capabilities, communication systems, and defensive technologies. More importantly, it gave humans the ability to integrate technologies from multiple alien sources into hybrid systems that no single species could have created. The results of Yunji's research program began appearing throughout human space as colonies and trading posts upgraded their equipment using techniques that alien observers could not understand or replicate. Human settlements began outperforming established alien colonies despite having access to less advanced base technology. Human ships started achieving performance levels that exceeded their design specifications by margins that should have been impossible. The alien intelligence services monitoring human activities compiled increasingly alarming reports as they documented systematic human advantages in areas that had nothing to do with superior technology or military force. Human diplomatic missions were resolving conflicts that had persisted for centuries by finding creative solutions that none of the involved species had considered. Human traders were establishing commercial relationships that benefited all parties in ways that traditional economic models could not explain. Most disturbing from the aliens' perspective was the fact that human success rates seemed to be accelerating rather than leveling off as would be expected if they were simply exploiting temporary advantages that other species would eventually learn to counter. Every human achievement created conditions that made future achievements more likely in a positive feedback cycle that showed no signs of reaching equilibrium. The Galactic Intelligence Analysis Center attempted to model human behavior using their most sophisticated prediction algorithms but found that human actions consistently exceeded the boundaries of their mathematical frameworks. The computers that had successfully predicted the development patterns of thousands of other species generated error messages when fed data about human activities because the observed behaviors fell outside the range of programmed possibilities. Emergency session of the Galactic Threat Assessment Council was called to address the growing discrepancy between humanity's official classification and their demonstrated capabilities. Representatives from dozens of species presented evidence that human performance in military, economic, and technological domain, the crisis that would forever change humanity's place in galactic civilization, began when the ancient enemy known as the Devourers emerged from the dark space between galaxies, where they had been dormant for over 10,000 years. The Devourers represented the ultimate test of any civilization because they consumed entire star systems by converting all matter into energy to fuel their massive biomechanical ships that could grow to the size of small moons. Every species in the galaxy knew the terrible history of previous Devourer invasions that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations and left vast regions of space completely empty of life. The established defensive strategy had been developed over thousands of years and involved consolidating all available forces around the most heavily fortified core worlds while sacrificing outer territories to buy time for evacuation and preparation of siege defenses. This approach had never actually succeeded in defeating the Devourers, but it had sometimes allowed remnant populations to survive long enough for the invaders to exhaust their immediate food sources and return to dormancy. The galactic powers considered survival of any percentage of their populations to be the best possible outcome when facing an enemy that had proven invincible against every conventional military force ever assembled. Admiral Sang-min had been promoted to command of the Human Defense Fleet based on his performance during the merchant convoy protection operations, but now faced a situation that dwarfed any previous challenge in human history. The Devourer invasion fleet consisted of over 300 bioships, each larger than any vessel ever constructed by galactic civilization. Their weapons could crack planets, and their shields had never been penetrated by any known technology. The Galactic Defense Council expected humanity to follow established protocols by evacuating their outer colonies and consolidating their forces around Earth while contributing what little they could to the overall defensive effort. According to every military analysis program in the galaxy, the human fleet was too small and technologically inferior to make any significant difference in the coming battle. Instead of following conventional wisdom, Sang-min proposed something that was universally considered to be suicidal madness. Rather than defending human territory, he wanted to attack the Devourers directly by targeting their supply lines and breeding colonies in the deep space regions where no military force had ever ventured. The plan violated every principle of established military doctrine and was rejected by every alien military advisor who reviewed it. Chief strategist Ji-hai had served alongside Sang-min during the Void Syndicate conflicts and understood that human tactical advantages were maximized in chaotic situations where conventional planning became impossible. She developed the operational framework for what became known as the Deep Strike campaign, using principles that had never been tested against enemies of the Devourer's caliber. The key insight that made the campaign possible came from tactician Kyung-ho, who realized that the Devourer's greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability. Their bioships were incredibly powerful, but required constant feeding to maintain their massive size and energy output. By attacking their supply chains rather than their combat forces, human forces could potentially starve the invasion fleet without having to defeat them in direct combat. The campaign began with small groups of human volunteers penetrating deep into Devourer-controlled space using modified ships that had been redesigned according to Yoonji's hybrid technology principles. These vessels combined human stealth capabilities with captured alien sensor systems and remnant navigation technology to create ships that could operate undetected in environments that would destroy conventional spacecraft. Commander Subin led the first strike team that successfully located and attacked a Devourer breeding facility hidden in the void between star systems. What her team discovered was that the ancient enemy was not invincible, but had simply never faced opponents willing to attack them, using methods that other species considered too dangerous to attempt. The breeding facilities were massive, but poorly defended because no previous enemy had ever managed to locate them, much less mount successful attacks against them. Subin's team destroyed 3 facilities using weapons that combined human explosives with alien energy technology, in configurations that created cascade failures throughout the Devourer supply network. Engineering Corps Commander In-ho specialized in converting captured enemy technology, but found that Devourer biomechanical systems operated on principles that were completely different from conventional technology. Instead of trying to reverse engineer their devices, he began experimenting with ways to turn their own biological processes against them. His breakthrough came when he discovered that Devourer bioships were essentially massive living organisms that could be infected with modified viruses designed to disrupt their metabolic processes. Working with samples provided by the strike teams, In-ho developed biological weapons that caused Devourer ships to literally digest themselves from within, while their crews remained unaware that anything was wrong until system failures became catastrophic. The Deep Strike campaign lasted for 8 months and achieved results that no military analyst had considered possible. Instead of losing territory to the Devourer invasion, human forces systematically dismantled the enemy supply network while avoiding direct confrontation with their superior combat forces. The biomechanical invasion fleet found itself slowly starving as breeding facilities were destroyed and supply lines were cut. For the first time in galactic history, a Devourer invasion was not just stopped, but actually reversed as the weakened bioships began retreating toward dark space rather than continuing their advance toward populated star systems. The ancient enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years was defeated not through superior firepower, but through tactics that no previous civilization had been willing to attempt. The war officially ended when Chief Diplomat Ye Jin negotiated the first peace treaty ever signed between galactic civilization and the Devourers. The ancient enemy agreed to return to dormancy in exchange for guaranteed access to uninhabited star systems where they could feed without threatening populated worlds. The treaty established humanity as the guarantors of the agreement because they were the only species the Devourers considered worthy of respect. Ambassador Velthar found himself in the unprecedented position of having to formally admit that the Galactic Threat Assessment Council had made the most catastrophic classification error in their entire history. Standing before the assembled representatives of dozens of species, he announced that humanity would be immediately reclassified from moderate threat level 3 to critical strategic asset with highest priority alliance status. The reclassification gave humans unrestricted access to all galactic technologies, unlimited territorial expansion rights, and permanent seats on every major governing council throughout known space. More importantly, it established humanity as the unofficial protectors of galactic civilization, with the responsibility for dealing with threats that conventional military forces could not handle. The ceremony marking humanity's new status was attended by representatives from every known species, including several that had never participated in galactic politics before the Devourer crisis. The Remnant Collective ended its millions of years of isolation to formally recognize humanity as the first species to achieve what it called evolutionary transcendence through adaptation rather than technological advancement. Explorer Jin Wu commanded the first mixed species expedition into the uncharted regions beyond galactic civilization, using ships that incorporated technology from dozens of different cultures, unified by human organizational principles. His mission was to establish contact with unknown civilizations and assess potential threats before they could endanger the galactic community. The expedition represented humanity's acceptance of its new role as guardians of galactic peace, but also demonstrated how human influence was transforming interstellar civilization itself. For the first time in galactic history, different species were working together as equals rather than maintaining the rigid hierarchical relationships that had characterized previous alliances. The transformation was most visible in the mixed crews serving aboard human vessels, where aliens from traditionally hostile species worked together effectively because human pack-bonding behaviors created social environments that transcended previous cultural barriers. Humans had not just joined galactic civilization, but were fundamentally changing how it operated at every level. The final irony of humanity's rise to galactic prominence was that the aliens' original assessment had been partially correct. Humans were indeed a moderate threat when evaluated using conventional criteria that measured technological advancement and military capacity. What the aliens had failed to recognize was that conventional criteria were inadequate for evaluating a species that operated according to completely different principles. Humanity's true strength lay not in superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but in psychological traits that made them uniquely effective at solving problems that other species considered impossible.